I know Adam really delivered it, and we're very, very cognizant at the IFF, and no questions that. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be having a heckler for the rest of the day there with Mr. Healy. But one of the things we're very cognizant about is our brand and the fact that our members really trust our brand. And so when you look at the ESS, and I really wanted to make this point as we kick off today on a couple of items. When we look at the ESS, we see a lot of people out in the marketplace promoting classes, especially in EVs, or companies that are selling products that can solve your lithium-ion battery issue. And the basic fact is we don't have enough information based on research at this time to say that anything other than water is the most effective extinguishing agent, and that there's a specific methodology or tactic that is going to be more effective than another when it comes to fighting EV fires. So we want to be cognizant that what we are putting out from an IFF perspective is based on research. It's something that we can validate. It's something that we can show our membership that we did our homework and that we are bringing them information that they can utilize on that emergency scene with confidence. Not without risk, because our job is inherently risky, but with confidence that it's based on solid fact. And we have a lot of discussion out there as I transition to the topics of today. A lot of discussion out there about PPE. We've seen speakers that say, I will bring you the facts on PPE. I will bring you the truth because you've heard some people talking about this aspect of PPE based on one research item or one research report. And I can tell you unequivocally that the IFF is basing our perspective and our positions on PPE based on research, based on fact, right? Our sole goal, I shouldn't say our sole goal, but our number one goal at the IFF is the health and safety of our membership. General President Ed Kelly made that abundantly clear, not only to staff, but to our membership, that the health and safety of our membership is number one priority, and that we need to be involved in the research so that we can bring this information that's based on data to our membership so we can make the changes in our standards that need to be made to reduce the exposure that our members experience every day they respond and every day they put their gear on. That is why it's important for us to bring this information to our membership in person and online so that they have the knowledge as they start to go through their PPE acquisitions to really understand what they're selecting and what they're looking for alternatively in their gear that can protect their membership. And we have partners in this. You'll hear from two of our representatives, Travis Tamarantz and Neil McMillan, but we also have partners in the research industry and the industry itself. And those partnerships are important because we need to exchange that information. They need to understand from the fire service what our priorities, what our concerns are. And we need to understand from them what the possibilities are and the approaches that we can take to start to reduce these exposures. And our first speaker is from UL Solutions. She's been a partner through the testing, through the standard development. I'm not going to say we always agree, but the thing is what we can really do is respectfully have that discussion. And if we disagree, then we disagree, and we can respectfully move on. But we retain that relationship. And that partnership is going to provide value for us. We have an issue down in Boca Raton. Our local down there has realized an accumulation of metallical dust in their regulator on their Scott packs. And when the manufacturer is not cooperating, we can turn to representatives, we can turn to partners in industry, especially in the testing and the research aspect, and say, what is happening here? Is it putting our members at risk? And what are the solutions so we can go back and hold that manufacturer accountable? And that's why it's important that we have these relationships and continue to build them. So I'll stop prophesizing up here, and I'll bring up our first speaker as we talk about this important aspect of our personal protective equipment And it's my pleasure to introduce Amanda Newsom from UL Solutions.
Okay. Can you hear me? All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Amanda Newsom from UL. I am the principal engineer for the PPE certification and testing that we do at UL. So anything that is PPE related is, I'm kind of the technical representation for UL. I represent UL in a number of technical committees, mostly NFPA. We don't have any PPE UL standards, so these are mostly NFPA. And so I spend a lot of time at NFPA meetings and ASTM, so for the test methods. So to start off, I wanted to talk a little bit about the certification process and how that works, because with PPE, it's a little, I don't know if it's unique, I don't want to say that, but it is a very complicated process that involves a lot of, basically it involves testing of new products only. So I think one thing that is misunderstood in the industry about PPE is that, there is this sort of degradation type testing that happens. We might look at things after it's been exposed to certain things, but actually certification is a review of a new product only. And that's to make sure that, so the certification of the PPE exists as a way to determine that the PPE was actually manufactured according to the standards. So what we want to do is make sure that you have the best case scenario whenever that certification stamp is put on there. Anything that ever happens to that PPE after the fact still leaves it certified. So I get all the questions all the time. If I put this badge on here, or if I put this harness on here, or if I do these things, is it still certified? And the answer ultimately is yes, but the liability of the certification falls on the person that's making that adjustment. The certification still exists and is still there. When we do a product evaluation for PPE, we are looking at 4 main buckets, and all of our PPE standards, I shouldn't say all, but most of our PPE standards consist of these 4 main buckets that we look at. And so the first one is a certification chapter, which outlines all the requirements that a certification organization and a testing laboratory have to follow in order to issue that certification or provide testing that offers that certification. We have to be accredited. It tells us what applies to that standard. So, structural firefighting, wildland firefighting, things like hazmat, so those are involved in the certification chapter. And then also it outlines the inspection requirements. And PPE has some pretty stringent inspection and testing requirements. And that's because of the multiple different layers of things that happen, so you've not only got the finished product, but you're looking at fabrics and trim and thread and fibers, and there's so many things that can go, that can change in that PPE item over the year that we don't necessarily always, we can't trust that they always stay the same. So there's a ton of inspection, there's a ton of testing that's done annually. The certification mark, of course, every PPE item you ever see should always have a third-party certification mark on it. If it does not have a third-party certification mark on it, then it is not certified. NFPA, all of the PPE documents for NFPA do require third-party certification. So just finding something that says NFPA certified, that's not adequate. You would also have to have a mark from a certification organization. Then we also have the compliance statement and other labeling requirements. NFPA documents all outline all this. And then there are design requirements that we look at, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in detail in a second. And then, of course, the testing of the components and the finished items. So I talked a little bit about how we have a hefty inspection program. There is continued monitoring and surveillance. We have random and unannounced inspections that occur 4 times a year at every manufacturing facility. No matter if one particular manufacturer has 2 different manufacturing facilities. We go into both of those facilities 4 times every single year to look at those products. And then we also have annual testing of all products. So that is a little bit unique to PPE in that we do test all products every single year. So we start in January, we get all products that are certified under a particular standard, and we have to complete the testing by the end of the year. So some testing. I don't have time to talk about all the testing, so I picked out some of the more exciting ones that we do, and so if I would love to show you all of them, but you'll just have to come for a tour someday if you'd like. So at UL, we have finally been able to complete our last laboratory expansion that will allow us to provide testing for every single item that you're wearing. So we've historically been familiar with the clothing and the footwear, gloves, and hoods and helmets, and then the components that go in those. But just earlier this year, we have successfully opened our SCBA lab, which Sean mentioned. And so we're looking forward to being able to have that UL mark on every single thing that you wear, and that way we can you can have confidence in all those products. The NFPA standards for PPE work so that most of the testing that is done is done on a component level. So we actually test very few products where the finished product goes onto some sort of mannequin or some sort of device, and we test the finished product. Everything that we do, we cut it up and we test it on a bench scale level. We do that because it allows us to increase options. So when you think about composite testing, if we tested on a full scale ensemble level, the number of composites that would be available for that PPE item would be cut down significantly due to the cost of providing that testing. Because every time you change one single layer, you have to do another test. So cutting up those pieces, doing them on a component level, allows for a lot more options whenever you're looking to purchase, whatever. And I have always heard firefighters love their options in their PPE. I swear there's no 2 garments that are alike out there. But the problem with that is there's a lack of system performance, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And I think that is, what the topic is that we are talking about today. The problem with that is that when you're looking at a lack of system performance, you are looking at a lack of ability to test for vapor protection or any of those type of harmful chemicals that are in any kind of fire that you're fighting. So the first test I'll highlight is the thermal protective performance test. So this is the TPP test. If you're familiar, if you've done any shopping for firefighter or for structural gear, you'll typically see TPP numbers. And these are basically, this is a test that we do that simulates a flashover. So we heard a little bit about flashover information yesterday. So what this does is it simulates a flashover. The requirement is that it should survive a flashover for 17.5 seconds. And so, which is a TPP of 35. So I'll show a little video, hopefully. So as you can see, it's a small bench scale test. We cut it into a 6x6 square and place it onto the TPP device, which consists of what he placed on top there is a sensor. It's a slug calorimeter sensor that's meant to, it basically measures the temperature rise and then compares it to to what we call the Stoll curve. And so that Stoll curve is how we predict a second degree burn, where the temperature rise crosses that Stoll curve. That's where we say, and you can see there at the bottom, the blue line is the temperature rise, and then the yellow line is the Stoll curve. Where those 2 items cross is where your TPP value falls. And so that test consists of a radiant exposure, and you could see the flames on it as well. So it's a radiant and convective heat exposure test, like I said, meant to indicate a flashover situation. The other number that you'll see counteractive to the TPP test is the THL test. So this is the breathability test. This is the historical breathability test, and I'll talk about the difference between this one and RET, which is coming out in the next edition. But this test measures the ability of a composite to allow air and moisture through that composite. So we typically talk about how the moisture barrier is also considered somewhat of a vapor barrier, but that moisture barrier also has to allow water to escape through it. And so what we do is we have the dry air outside at 25 degrees, and then the dry air inside, which is say inside your coat, that would be set at 35. And so naturally, it's going to want, the heat is going to rise through that composite. And that's done on a dry test. And so basically we measure how much or how easily it is for the composite to let that heat escape to the cooler air above it. And then we do the same thing, except we wet that plate underneath of it. So we have moisture along with that heat trying to rise through it, and we measure the amount of energy that it takes to put those to allow that moisture to go through. When we do that, we take those two numbers, and that's what we call our THL value. So for the evaporative resistance test, it's a very similar test. It's done on the same equipment. The evaporative resistance test is coming out in the new 1970 standard. We'll see when that's issued, but anyway, it will be in there. So it's very similar, except that in the RET test, the air on the plate and the air above the composite are the same temperature. So it's at equilibrium. And there's also a wet plate underneath. So what we're looking for is when the air is all the same temperature, how well does that composite allow the heat and moisture to escape from that composite? So when you look at TPP and compare it to breathability, I've charted out here what all the current composites that are on the market, and you can see there's nearly 1,000 composites on the market today. And so the sweet spot is where I have the red box, because you always hear from all the manufacturers, you know, if you want more TPP, you want the more thermal protection, you have to have less breathability. Well, it's not necessarily the case. You can have a little bit of both. You just have to be able to, you know, you just kind of want to get into that area. So the minimum is 35. A good TPP is somewhere above 40. And a good THL is somewhere around that 260, 275. I mean, obviously, the higher you go, the better. Don't get me wrong. But you know, if you're in kind of a normal, I don't know, you're not in an extreme client location, I guess I should say. You know, some of those, you can balance some of those out and get a little bit of both if that's what you need. But, you know, yeah, if you're in Houston in the summertime, you probably want a higher THL value than a typical THL value. The other thing to consider with that is the design. So you can pick out the best TPP and THL value you ever wanted, and you're going to slap some pockets on it and slap everything else, reflective trim, and it's going to have your name on it, and it's going to be all, you know, decked out and everything, all the options that you can get. Well, it doesn't matter what your THL value is anymore because you've now just negated all of that. So when you're selecting these different options, it's important to keep in mind that the design of the garment also plays a huge impact on your perceived breathability. So keeping that, you know, in mind is important. Although I know there are a lot of like flex products out there and stretchy products that are coming out. So those will help improve your THL without actually having a THL. You'll feel better in it. There's no real world correlation. So just because you have a TPP of 35 doesn't mean you have 17.5 seconds to get out of a flash fire exposure. So don't think that, you know, basically the way to use TPP and THL values is to compare composite. But it's not going to give you any real world, you know, application to it. And then consider the weight. Of course, I talked about some of the stretchy things and things. So yeah, the lower the weight of the product, the more comfortable it would be. Now, protection from contaminants. So this is where we'll bring it back to the battery discussion, and not just battery, but any type of vapor protection. We have, when you think about it, we have to have some ensemble level testing. We actually don't, for firefighter structural gear, we do absolutely no ensemble level testing for vapor protection. The only thing we do on an ensemble level is a shower test. So basically, we're looking at biologicals on that test. We're not looking at vapor protection. Now, you do have your moisture barrier that does offer protection, but you've got, it's coming up in the coat, it's going in the sleeves, it's going in the foot, up on your pant leg. So typical structural firefighting gear, there are some particular options out there now, which do offer a little bit more, but the ensemble level testing is lacking on a structural firefighting suit. And then interfacing, like I said, can help with that. So if you do have a lot of nice overlap, tucking, things like that, then you can improve that and you can keep your arms better. If you have your hoods that go down far enough in your coat, you can offer some sort of ensemble level testing, but we're not actually doing any testing on that for your certification. So just keep in mind there's not really any good test methods out there to do that right now for structural gear. So I mentioned the shower test. This is the shower test. We're actually doing a hazmat suit here. And what we're testing for, like I said, this really just tests the front closure system and the ability to keep liquids out from the garment. We do add surfactant to the water because we're actually not testing it. We're actually testing it for biologicals. So we want to get that surface tension to more of a biological exposure versus just, shower heads that you would see in a fire. And this first one is actually, it was staged. It's a failure. You can see what a failure would, well, I think I might have taken that part out, but this is a pass, obviously. So on the inside there is an indicator garment that is just a gray sweatsuit, and you can see inside whether or not any water penetrated into the garment during that shower test. Oh, I think I show it next. It's the failure. Yeah, and see on this one you can see that zipper offered no liquid or biological protection, and so that one's considered a failure. That's the only ensemble level testing that we do. We do have a particulate level or a particulate protection test that's in there. It hasn't been really well used or adopted at this point, but it is out there, it is available, and what we're doing there is it's an ensemble. It was an ensemble level test. Now it's a garment and pant test, where we use these surrogate items and just because what we're trying to do is make it more easily obtainable by manufacturers and that they will use it. But there's only one laboratory that performs this test, and they don't do a lot of testing for the industry like they do a lot of government testing. So we don't have access to the lab very easily, so which is another reason. It's very expensive. It's not highly used. So there's some troubles with it. But we need to have more test methods that offer the ability to measure particulate and vapor protection. And this one is not really it, but it's the only one that's in the standard, and that's why it's not really adopted. So I mentioned before, keeping your interfacing secure between PPE items is one way to do it. And, obviously just kind of common sense when it comes to that. And some of those larger particles, I will talk about cleaning in a second, but the larger particles, if you keep them out of your suit, they actually can kind of help absorb some of that vapor protection. The particles will actually absorb that vapor protection. You wash them off, and that way they're not getting to you, they're only getting to your PPE items, which are then washed away. So keeping them out and then washing them off is the best thing you can do. There were some studies that were done a few years ago by some of our friends, and they did a fire exposure simulator test where they were actually measuring what type of vapors were in a fire scene. And so they did, what they were able to measure was that, well, they measured benzene and toluene in particular and found that on a typical structural firefighter ensemble, you're getting a significant amount of parts per billion inside your suit. And so you can see for benzene inside the suit, you're around 65, 62,000, where the short-term exposure limits for benzene is 1,000 parts per billion. So you're getting a pretty significant amount of exposure to benzene and other vapors. I mean, benzene is just one of them, but if benzene's getting in there, then we can assume others are too. And so you're getting a pretty high exposure to those vapors inside that suit. So it's important to keep those interfaces together. That's the best thing you can do. And then hopefully we'll get some vapor level testing going in the future. We are driving. There are some changes coming to the standard. This is, we'll see any one of these, I don't know, may or may not stand the standard. We're in the middle of the process right now, but they are removing a few tests and or changing some of the tests so that new and safer products and materials can be sent to the market. In particular, the light degradation test, the viral, the multi-environment conditioning. And they're adding UV exposure to outer shells because of the new finishes that are being used. We want to make sure that these can uphold the UV exposure that is required, and it doesn't degrade from sunlight and other things. And then flame after fuel exposure. So we're actually going to be doing pouring diesel fuel on outer shell materials, and then doing a flame test after to see if it rolls off, and if you wash it, does it wash out? And then we'll do a flame exposure test afterwards. I mentioned the new SCBA lab. We're excited to announce our new SCBA lab. We have a state-of-the-art equipment in there, all brand new. We have the heat and flame apparatus, which you can see a photo of right there. So we can do the full the full SCBA level testing. We have the full program along with past devices, airflow performance, communication, dust resistance, and other strength and integrity tests. So we have all that available at UL as well. And cleaning. So I mentioned earlier about the cleaning. I think, there's a lot of question out there whether or not we can actually clean exposures from lithium-ion battery fires. I don't think we have the answer to that yet, or at least I haven't heard it. There is some research going on, but there's also a lot of testing going on. A lot of the ISPs are looking into whether or not they can effectively clean that off. So I think more will be coming on that. The way that we determine whether or not it's effective cleaning is we have a verification process. This is the NFPA 1851 standard. And so basically what we do is we take a swatch of outer shell fabric, we place a contaminant on that product, and then package it up. And so right now we have VOCs, we have heavy metals, and we have biologicals. And we package it up, we send it to an ISP for them to perform their cleaning. And then they send it back to us, and we find out whether or not, or we extract it off of there and measure whether or not anything is still there. And so those are those cleaning efficacy numbers that you're starting to, that you're seeing from your ISPs. I mentioned we do the removal. So right now the requirements is 50% removal of VOCs and heavy metals, and then we also have a 99.9% reduction in biologicals that's required. The proposed number in the 1851 standard at the moment is to increase this to a 70% cleaning, because we think now that we can do measurements, we can also do, we can measure whether or not we're doing better. So we want to get that number up, hopefully to 70. Right now, the ISPs that are verified right now by UL, this is only UL's numbers, where VOCs are closer to 60, our metals are closer to 63. So you can see we have still a little bit of ways to go. I did recently see some numbers that included hours and Intertext data, and those are closer to, once that averaged out, it was closer to around 69%. So we are very close to 70. I think it can be done. We're allowing some other things to change in the standard, which will allow the ISPs the greater ability to actually perform that cleaning effectively, such as higher wash temperatures, which is a very controversial topic. That's all I have for you guys today for PPE certification, and I will be on the panel in a little bit if there's any questions.
You shut me down. You try to silence me. There will be time for questions on the panel discussion for anybody that wants to ask Amanda questions on the UL testing. But as I mentioned before, we do realize that the number one killer of firefighters is cancer. Whether you're on-duty members or active members, I should say, or retired members. We know our members are experiencing cancer rates at an increased rate than the general public, but also at a younger age. And cancers that typically don't show up to a later age are now showing up in our younger members. And one of the strategies to reduce these incidents of cancer is to reduce the exposure. And then if you are exposed, to start to do on-scene decontamination, not only of the individual, but of the gear. And the IFF has been very active, and we've been very blessed to have very dedicated members, very knowledgeable members involved in the standard development, but also the development of the educational materials that go with it and following the research. And one of those members is the president of the Wilkes-Barre Local 104, Travis Tamarantz.
Think I'm on here? All right. Well, thanks for having me. I want to get started, talk a little bit about PPE cleaning and decon. I'm going to wander here. I can't seem to ever stand still. So a little bit about me really quick. My name is Travis Tamarantz. I come from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, where I'm a suppression captain, also the local president, and I serve as the PFAS Advisory Board Chair to the State Association. We have a lot to jam in here in a couple minutes, so I want to kind of get rolling with it. But the two things we need to discuss is, number one, why we're here, PPE cleaning and decon. But more importantly, why do we need to do that? And as Sean just said, like, the IFF has taken a good stance and, trying to get that out to our membership, that there is a cancer problem in the fire service. I think we all know that. It's sort of a buzzword. But I'll go back to this quote with the Firefighter Cancer Support Network. This came out in their white paper years ago, where it says, "Cancer is the most dangerous, underrecognized threat to the health and safety to our nation's firefighters." Underrecognized. We all know it's kind of like a buzzword now. We have that discussion. We know we can get cancer as members of the fire service. But is that really the talk that's going on at the kitchen table, honestly? How many times do we come back from a fire, we see guys that aren't washing their gear, it's a struggle sometimes to get them to take a shower and do the things that we should be doing. So that's kind of why we're here. We got to go through some of this. Maybe we can start to spread that word and start doing our part. I think we really need to get that down to the individual members. Take a look at some of these ages, locations, and the cancers. So these were a couple names that I pulled from the IFF line of duty database. You can go online and select cancers, certain cancers, but there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of names that have been added because of occupational cancer. A 37-year-old with liver cancer, 37-year-old with brain cancer, 60-year-old with leukemia, and they're all over the map. So it's not just localized to New England or Pennsylvania, California, anywhere like that. It's all over. It's all ages. If those numbers don't do it, 75% of the names added to the IAFF line of duty database from 2015 to 2020 have been from occupational cancer. 3/4 of the names. And look at the trend here. 2019, 202 of those names. And hopefully this sinks in. 348 in 2022. That's almost one a day, ladies and gentlemen. Almost one death a day due to occupational cancer. So where are these exposures coming from? Smoke, soot, byproducts of combustion, which are known as volatile organic compounds or VOCs. We have polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which is a whole nother set of chemicals that we're exposed to. And then our other buzzword, as of late, PFAS. So let's talk about smoke, soot, and byproducts of combustion. Over 285 known chemicals are found in smoke, soot, and byproducts of combustion. Some of those being hydrogen chloride, formaldehyde, hydrochloric acid. I mean, let's ask ourselves the question here. Would we go to a chlorine leak and stroll in there with no SCBA? Would we not decon when we come back? So why are we doing it when we're responding to residential fires, car fires, dumpster fires, any type of fire? Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Oh, my slide got cut off there. But basically, PAHs are incomplete burning, of oil, trash, wood, the byproducts of that are given off. They're also known to cause adverse health conditions, cancer, and one of the big things comes from diesel fuel. Diesel exhaust. So when we're not using our diesel capture systems to their full extent, and it's getting into our gear, getting into the stations, those are all exposures that are unnecessary. PFAS. So those are manufactured chemicals. We now know that were found in AFFF foams and our turnout gear. That's no secret. They do spread, they attach to dust particles. So we're finding them in our stations. And again, increased risk of cancer and health issues. So who dictates what cancer is, what gives us cancer? That's the IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer. So many of the chemicals that are found in smoke, soot, byproducts of combustion, PAHs, PFAS, they're what are known as group 1 carcinogens. And those group 1 carcinogens are known to humans to cause cancer. As of recent, they just released a monogram where the entire fire service is now classified as a group 1 carcinogen. So the fire service as an occupation is known to cause cancer to humans. How are we getting it? Well, we're inhaling it, we're ingesting it, and through the dermal route of absorption. We're going to spend some time on dermal because we're talking about PPE and cleaning. So the carcinogens are basically being impregnated into our gear every time we're exposed. As our body temperature increases, our pores increase, we're increasing the rate of absorption of those carcinogens into our body, into our bloodstreams. Let's talk a little bit about PPE. So what do we know? We know that those, again, contaminants are impregnating into our gear. Things like copper, aluminum, which are heavy metals, those VOCs that I talked about, benzene, toluene, PAHs, PFAS, they're all getting into our gear. Then we're wearing our gear, we're getting it into our bloodstream, our gear's off-gassing, we're breathing it in, and most importantly here, particulates can transfer to personal effects in vehicles. So anytime that you take your gear and you're working an overtime shift, you throw it in the back of your car, you just transfer that to your vehicle. Then you're going to go home, take your son or daughter for their Happy Meal, and you're exposing them. So it's not just localized to us as the fire service. We're doing this to our families, our friends, anybody that's in our vehicles around us. So it's certainly something to think about. What else do we know? So those VOCs, we're seeing an increase of them being excreted in our urine outputs, in our exhaled breath, and we're absorbing those VOCs that penetrate our gear. Recent study, which I believe was actually NIST, not NIOSH, I believe I misquoted that, but more than 20 types of PFAS present in our gear find that abrasion, weathering, and heat is causing an increase in the release of PFAS, and that laundering actually may be helping it out by washing it away. We know that search and attack firefighters have higher contaminants on our hands because we're touching the walls, the floors, all of the contents of burning, buildings, cars. Outside vent firefighters had higher levels on their neck because of inconsistent hood use. So sometimes they had the hood on, sometimes they didn't. Which brings up the point of gloves and hood need laundering considerations also. So let's get into the decon and cleaning a little bit. NFPA 1851, the latest edition is 2020. That is the governing standard for cleaning and decontamination of protective gear for structural, firefighting, and proximity gear. So what does that say? What does that mean? Well, the purpose of the standard shall be to establish a program for structural and proximity protective clothing to reduce the risk potential with poorly maintained, contaminated, or damaged protective ensembles and ensemble elements. So there's a reason that this standard exists, and that's something that we in the fire service should really take a look at and follow, because that's what we developed, that's what we had our input in to say this is how our gear should be properly cleaned. So what does it cover? It covers the selection, the inspection, cleaning and decontamination, which is what we're going to focus on, repair, storage, and then how we're getting rid of our gear. So in the cleaning and decon, we could break it down into a couple of steps. So prior to the incident, during the incident, after it, and then advanced cleaning. So at the station, this is our routine inspection. We come in the shift, need to take a look at our gear. Starts any rips, tears, abrasions, any type of soiled that may have occurred on our days off. If we find any of that at all, it needs to be inspected by an independent service provider or an ISP. It should be put out of service, sent out, checked, tested, repaired, and sent back. How do we know what we're looking for? And even as we go on here, we talk about advanced cleaning and advanced inspections. Many gear manufacturers offer online training for those inspection methods and cleaning methods. You can reach out to your individual gear manufacturer, see if they offer anything, but there are some additional companies out there that do offer those certifications. So let's talk a little bit at the scene. So most people would know this as gross decon, but we can't call it that because we're not completely decontaminating. So the fancy term is preliminary exposure reduction. So we're setting up a little station there. You can see the guy with a little cone there. There's a low pressure line, and he's getting rinsed off. His exposures are being reduced. But as I'm seeing pictures from across the country and talking to people, one of the big things that we're still failing to maintain, myself included in that, is to remain on air when that happens. You could do it wet or dry, so the big concern is getting soaked down and then returning into a fire. You could be brushed off, go back in, do what you're doing, but before you're ready to leave for good, that's when you want to get wet down with a soft bristle brush, some mild detergent, get cleaned up good. Why are we doing that? Why is this important? Because we're reducing the contaminants right out of the gate by 85%. That's a huge number. We're never going to hit 100% as far as what the science is saying right now, but 85% out of the gate is huge. When you're getting ready to leave, take your gear off, bag as much of it as you could, put it in a compartment. You don't want to be in the cab breathing that in on the way back. What happens when we get back? 1851 says that advanced cleaning shall be performed by an element manufacturer verified cleaner, manufacturer, trained organization. We know that that doesn't happen, so it does allow for a member of the organization who has received training in advanced cleaning methods to be the one in charge of how gear gets laundered. So again, there's certification out there available. One member of your department can have it and coordinates that on how your gear gets laundered. At the minimum, gear should be sent out, cleaned, and have that advanced cleaning done every 6 months or when they become soiled. So anytime, that's not just structure fires, we're talking car fires, dumpster fires, things like that, your gear still needs to be laundered. It establishes standard for cleaning methods, including extractors, dryers, what type of detergents, how acidic they are, the RPMs of those gear extractors that we're using, which is all important because we don't want to be throwing our gear into a residential washing machine. I think we all kind of know that at this point, but the point of that certification is having somebody that understands that maybe one of our members doesn't quite understand. Or we have a new member that doesn't understand that, you know, his hood should be washed separately from the rest of his gear. And that advanced cleaning also covers the methods for boots, gloves, hoods, and helmets. What else is in 1851? It addresses chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear incidents, hazmat, anytime we get any type of body fluids on us, how we're going to clean that. They even go as far as giving us a little flow chart in there, which is a handy little reference to say, hey, did you go to a CBRN incident? Your gear's decommissioned. We're not cleaning that. Hazmat incident, there's our new word, preliminary exposure reduction. Have it assessed, and then go from there. They have another flow chart, which also helps us out. Did you get body fluids on you? There it is, preliminary exposure reduction. Isolate it, contain it, and get it evaluated. Can it be sanitized? Those are all questions, and you can see why it's important to have somebody that understands that advanced cleaning process of what can and can't be done. So what to do? What can we do? Again, follow that 1851 process. It's there for a reason. It's a pretty good standard that can put us all in the same boat to get our gear cleaned as we need it, that we're not being exposed as much as we are now by just maybe putting our gear with the liners together and throwing it in the extractor, calling it cleaned, because it's not. Clean our tools, our SCBA, and our other equipment. Only keep turnout gear with turnout gear. Remember what I said about this off-gassing, particulates are transferring to your personal effects. How many gear racks do we see across the country where somebody's got a sweatshirt or a hat or, you know, their coat, their civilian clothes hanging on the rack with them? Our gear's touching that, and then we're putting it back on and getting in our car and going home. When we are transferring our gear to our vehicles, different stations, whatever we need to do, airtight containers. Something with a lid. Put it in there, put it in the back of your car, go on your way. And most importantly, stop wearing gear unnecessarily. I'm not talking about responses. I'm not getting into standard operating procedures or anything like that. I'm talking about when we don't need to be wearing our gear. Calendar shoots, 5Ks, stair climbs. We don't need to be wearing our gear for that. That is an exposure that we do not need. I think the public generally understands that if we're transporting Santa Claus on a fire engine, the people dressed in blue uniforms are the firemen. Santa Claus is the guy with the beard and the big red suit. We don't need to be in our turnout gear doing that. Threw 2 pictures in there of me. Drive one little point home here. Think about our kids, right? I've been around this since I've been in diapers, quite literally, as you can see. But think about this. Anybody that's parents here probably has pictures of their kids in gear at some point. You know, whether it was when they were born or whatever. This is what we know now would be the equivalent of my parents letting me smoke cigarettes at those ages. Like, think about it. Think about what we're doing. And if we don't want to protect ourselves or protect the people we work with, we got to do it for our kids and our families. That's it. All I got. I'll be on the panel as well if there's any questions or anything.
Thank you, Travis. I think we're ahead of schedule. So we're moving along here. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our next speaker, my colleague at the IFF. I met Neil for the first time about 1.5 years ago in Ottawa, and we didn't know each other from Adam. And it was a very quick, short period of time where I realized it was like the Wonder Twins powers activate, right? Neil has an analytical mind. He really goes deep down into the science of the PPE, of the exposures, of the impact of the exposures on the physical health and well-being of our membership. And I come with an operational mindset. And it's great when we have a complex issue. He's a partner I can always turn to and say, hey, take a look at this, Rain Man. Tell me what you see and break this down for me. And he can really, he's such a gift for our members at the IFF. And he's going to talk about, DVP Colbert talked about the lawsuit we have against the NFPA. And it's no secret. We have some issues with their processes. But what General President Kelly has said is we're not walking away from this process. NFPA has over 300 standards, and we counted almost 200 standards that affect our membership. I mentioned it yesterday. Codes and standards define our work environment. They define how our gear is designed, and as Travis talked about, maintained and cleaned. They define our apparatus. They define our health and wellness checks. They define our training. They define our qualifications. We have to be involved. We have to be involved in these processes. And we really want to talk about the development of 1851, 1850, 1971 as this consolidation of NFPA standards has really thrown us a challenge to be involved in so many standards that are being modified at this short period of time or coming up at this next standards meeting in June. So Neil's going to talk about some of the potential changes that are coming into the standard. Now, these are being proposed. These are in draft form. So we still need to be active. We still need to be proactive. We still need to get to the meeting in June to make sure our agenda gets through. And so Neil's going to talk about these changes, and I won't go any further. Neil?
Thank you very much, Sean, for that warm welcome. The Rain Man reference is more applicable to my affinity for fish sticks on Tuesdays than anything else, really. But really happy to be here, talk about standards, talk about what's going on in NFPA. So we're going to talk about the future of firefighting PPE, selection, care, maintenance, and covering a few objectives there. We're also going to be covering where we've been, where we're going, where hopefully the future will be. So we'll be discussing the standards themselves. We'll be discussing some of the conversations that have occurred in these meetings. And what I'm really going to try to promote is kind of a call to action. I mean, we really need firefighters. We need those in the fire service to be part of these discussions because, you know, our end users, our members are the ones who have to wear this gear 24/7. Sometimes they have to wear it for 10 years. So, you know, they may only get a couple sets over the course of their career. So I usually like to start my presentations with a quote. And this one here is from Charles Schwab. He was a head of Bethlehem Steel Company, and he was president of U.S. Steel. And even 100 years ago, you know, as a captain of industry, he identified the need for universal safety to be embraced, you know, not just by industry and managers and employers, but by workers, because that's really how we're going to thrive as communities. And we take an oath to serve our citizens, but we are integral parts of those communities. So what we're discussing as far as the standards for our PPE, how we stay healthy, safe from occupational disease, injury on the fire ground, it's affecting us and our families, but it's also affecting our communities. And we know that we can't have healthy communities without healthy firefighters. So cracking right into it with 1970. So 1970 is this new consolidated standard. It's coming from 1971, 1972, and it's covering the type of requirements, and Amanda did a great job speaking about a lot of the testing, but it's for all firefighters. These are minimum standards. They're applicable for firefighters in the US and Canada and anywhere else that adopts NFPA, but sometimes it's industrial firefighters, sometimes it's military firefighters, sometimes it's municipal or rural volunteer firefighters. So we have to keep in mind that those in the discussions for setting these minimum standards have different priorities, different focuses. Industrial firefighters may be concerned about specific fuel hazards, liquid hazards, physical hazards, and they may be limited, due to staffing in industrial sites and in these private industries with respect to tactics and certain conditions. When it comes to military firefighters, some of the things I've heard within the committees are representations from representatives from the U.S. military saying that it takes a long time to transition. They don't want to see a lot of change because it could take 7 years for U.S. Navy or whoever else to be able to equip their members with new gear under a new standard. And they might have unique conditions also that need to be addressed, shipboard firefighting, etc. And when it comes to municipal or career or volunteer firefighters, this probably covers the widest gamut. I mean, firefighting's like politics, it's local, buildings are different, response models are different, staffing's different, mutual aid is different, hazards are different. It's a wide range. And again, we have relatively few voices, whether it's 5 people or 30 people in an NFPA meeting. That's not a great representation. So we really, again, need to promote those out there that have concerns, have questions, to address them through the NFPA process. So right into the consolidation. 1970, when it comes out, will be the incorporation of 1971, 1972, 1981, 1982. And this is proximity and structural firefighting gear, SCBA, past devices. 1850 will be the care, selection, and maintenance, and it's been a bit of a monumental task for those that volunteer their time to help out with these committees to consolidate them. So hats off to all of them. But why are they consolidating? So these cycles or revision processes are typically set up every 5 years, and some standards to be consolidated or correlated have to ensure that they're matching. So you could have a standard about how to design gear and a standard how to clean gear. If they're out of sync, it could pose some problems. So that's one reason why the consolidation process was started. Another one is that a lot of the representatives across these similar committees are the same people. They're the same people across 2, 3, 4 similar committees. So consolidation makes sense just from a work standpoint. However, there's problems with consolidation. These are now monumental documents. You just heard from President Tamarance. He attends these meetings. He's a full-time fire captain. He's a full-time union president, and he's got to review 500-page documents being proposed in consolidation process. That's a big lift for those within the fire service to participate. So those are some of the challenges, as well as trying to identify when certain topics are popping up in different task group meetings. So what does it cover? We'll talk a little bit about the scope, where we began, where we're going, just for the gear side of things. So as we heard, again, Amanda did a great job, and we really lean on the expertise from UL in these meetings because they've been in it from the beginning. As she mentioned, there's an auditing process that goes on through a lot of testing, so it's really kind of eye-opening to understand what happens behind the curtain there. But these tests are similar for certain parts of PPE. I mean, flame, heat resistance, of course, is important when dealing with structural firefighting PPE, but helmets have impact tests, gloves have dexterity tests. When it comes to footwear and protective hoods, they have their own forms of testing, particulate blocking potentially for the hoods, footwear, cut resistance, abrasion resistance. And there's emerging hazards and threats that sometimes pop up out there from our membership, and we have to have those discussions whether the solution should be in the form of a new test within a standard that's applicable to all firefighters wherever they are, or whether that type of hazard it should be kind of really addressed more in an individual department hazard assessment when they're speccing out, their kit. And I mean, one instance of that is, there was last year, July 5th, 2023 in Newark, New Jersey, double LODD, member Augie Akabu, as well as Bear Brooks passed away in a shipboard fire there in New Jersey. And other members within New Jersey's fire department suffered PPE failures at that fire. This is a shipboard fire. There was water on decks above the fire deck, and they're operating in heated water that was boiling, and they were having the soles coming off their boots. Jeff Stell did an amazing investigation on those failures. More to come potentially in the future. And the questions arise, is that something now that we have to consider including a test for? How universal is that type of hazard in the fire service, operating in heated water in similar conditions? Is that something that has to be addressed? And I'll talk about it a little bit later when I mentioned the PPE technician position, which is something being proposed in 1850. But these are some of the philosophical questions that get discussed. And that's, again, why I'll go back to more input from the fire service is incredibly important. We need to hear from the big locals, the small locals, others to understand, what they need, what those requirements are, so we can assess these risks and either incorporate solutions into a standard or leave it up to the department to have those tailored requirements. When it comes to little technical difficulty here with my clicker. Maybe if I... Oh. Maybe we can just advance the slide one. Perfect. So when it comes to the garments, most tests actually, I would say go to the jacket, the pants, part of that ensemble. There's seam testing. There's testing that has to be done at both the supplier component level as well as the manufacturer, the cut and sew level. And there are proposed changes we'll be getting into, but it's a wide list. This 1971 center has a whole bunch of testing. And having some involvement with international standards and seeing what's done in other parts of the world, Europe, Australia, Asia, elsewhere, I have to say that the amount of testing going into North American gear is robust. It's good. And it's reflected in the price of our gear. Our gear can cost $3,000 to close to $6,000. In Europe, their turnout gear, from what I've been told, ranges from 700 euros to 2,400 euros. Of course, it reflects in the amount of testing that's done, and some would say potentially in the performance capabilities of that gear. And having, again, the philosophical conversations of what we want from our gear, what we expect from it, the durability and life of the gear, is all part of that. Where are we going to be tomorrow? So, if we can advance the slide one more time. No. Perfect. So, where were we? Back in 1973, the first standard came out, and when it comes to hazards, what hazards do we have to worry about? Getting on our gear, battery acid. That's what everyone said. Battery acid, probably a big one to start from. So there's tests incorporated there. What do we want our gear made out of? Sure, cotton's good, rubber's good, canvas is good, metal fibers, why not? And asbestos, great, flame-resistant capabilities from asbestos. It outperforms from a flame standpoint anything we have in 2024, but absolutely something that comes with other hazards and risks. So we would definitely not make the assumption or take the stance that we should be incorporating asbestos into our turnout gear because of its incredible performance requirements, but that's where we were. And at the time, this was groundbreaking. This was the leading edge. This was the bar that was set. And I'm sure 20 years from now, people will be talking about what meatheads we are, dealing with the current revised standard and all the limitations. If you can advance the slide. So as we heard from Amanda, she did a great job talking about THL, thermal heat loss, and TPP, the protective, the insulative properties. Dr. Meredith McQuarrie, that's her slide up there. That's her information. The minimum standard for TPP, thermal protective performance, is 35. You saw a great chart from Amanda showing how the 1,000 different garment ensemble configurations are all over the map there. But once you do put on, your piping, you put on pockets, you put an SCBA on, big padding in the knees. What she was showing here is where that TPP number really is and really is representative. And it can be misleading if you're a purchaser, a quartermaster, you're dealing on a committee, a steering committee to spec out gear. And, we are waffling over, should we have a 40 TPP, a 42 TPP? What are the trade-offs? You need to understand that, again, in application, real-world situations, once we're kitted up, have our radios in our pockets, have everything else we put in our pockets, these values may not be applicable. Perfect. When it comes to some of the conversations, it's like 40 years, things haven't changed. The topics that are still up at the technical committee are still talking about, the vapor barrier, the moisture barrier, breathability, metabolic heat buildup. What the expectation is from a member. Should we be feeling the heat? Does feeling the heat serve a function operationally? I believe it does. I believe that the whole purpose of our standards is to make sure we don't kill firefighters from heart attacks, cancer, from injuries. And this article, when 1987, when they were trying to incorporate turnout gear as opposed to 3/4 length coats and pull-up boots, those are the same discussions that were coming up. They're going to cook in their juices wearing turnout gear. They're going to have this, they'll all be dropping dead from heart attacks. That didn't happen. We're trying to ensure that there's as much comfort in the garments, but we have to kind of weigh whether this perceived risk is actually something to be concerned about moving forward. And again, we really need others to lend their voice to the chorus of the fire service to contribute there, because it's pretty onerous to think that some of the decisions or stances and opinions that we take within a committee is going to have impacts across 1.2 million firefighters in the U.S., 346,000 of them being our IFF members. So what may be new? There's the option, or not option, but there's the promotion of having particulate blocking be mandatory for hoods. That's one thing that may come out of the new standard. It may be incorporated in there once it's published that particulate blocking components aren't going to be necessary, which we think is going to be an advancement. As Amanda was mentioning, interfaces in our PPE don't do a great job of preventing particulate and vapor ingress, so this will be an advancement there. Restricted substances list is one that's had a lot of discussion and debate on, and we thought we had a solution, and we're struggling through some processes within NFPA to be able to do that. But the whole purpose of this is to ensure that anything incorporated in our gear, through any of the manufacturing processes, do not involve hazardous metals, pesticides, flame retardants, and PFAS chemicals. We think it's really important that when we get issued our gear, we're getting issued gear that doesn't have any toxins that are going to contribute to our overall body burden of chemicals. But there's challenges. NFPA doesn't like the idea of us putting things within a standard that limits commercial availability of any component, regardless of its hazard. But consensus within the task groups, consensus within all parties represented at the technical committee level is that we need to be advancing this, and that's something I'm really happy to see. And it's really proof that communications are working well within those groups, and we really have to strike when the iron's hot, because having consensus is not always easy in these groups. As we heard, we may see an evaporative resistance test being incorporated to get a more accurate representation of thermal heat loss or breathability. We may also see a compliance period be extended, but through a temporary interim amendment that's been proposed, which has the support of the IFF. We're hoping to have that transition period brought back to 12 months as representative of where it was before and as it is in other places. Another thing we'll see being changed is the removal of the UV light test, which is applicable only to moisture barriers presently, like unprotected moisture barriers. This is a real point of contention because it limited moisture barrier construction to only incorporating expanded polytetrafluoroethylene Teflon PFAS compounds. We do have one product in the market now that appears to be PFAS free. We'd like to see more options available to the fire service that don't have those chemicals. The removal of this UV light test, which we have consensus on, should be something we see in the new published standard. And of course, there may be a full component type of UV test, which would be more representative of our gear actually seeing sunlight from the outside in and not the other way around. Get past this one and get right into 1850. Okay. So 1850, this is the care maintenance selection. And you can advance the slide. Great. So where do we begin? It doesn't have its origin as far back as the 70s, like 1971. This really kind of came about, just over 20 years ago. But some of the same, again, discussions kind of come up. How clean is clean? What's soiled? What needs to be clean? How's cross-contamination mitigated? Who's responsible for all these things? Cataloging this. What's mandatory? Laundering periods, what they should look like. When should we be retiring our gear? How should we store it? And, it might be tough to read some of the comments there, but those are comments from 2000 where, the fire service representatives are saying a little bit of fire contamination shouldn't be something we're worried about, shouldn't necessitate all these cumbersome requirements and logistics of cleaning. Let's not worry about that. And then, other comments from the fire service were that having to log your gear, having to log cleaning and damage and repairs is, again, overly onerous. It's a bureaucratic nightmare. And, 24 years removed, I don't think we would have those same kind of opinions. We understand how important, our gear is, how expensive it is, how, necessary it is to ensure life safety of firefighters. But that's where we were. And at the time, that was cutting edge. So 1851, soon to be 1850, covers a selection, inspection, cleaning, disinfecting, repairs, storage, testing, verification, retirement, disposal of turnout gear. So from an inspection standpoint, what could be new? We could see that if you purchase a new set of gear and it's stored as per NFPA recommendations, you may not have to do an annual inspection on it for the first 3 years. Certain models within different departments may see them purchasing gear that doesn't get issued immediately. So that actually removes a burden to a department. We may also see a dunk test for boots and gloves. I think this is good. This is really going to kind of test the barriers within our glove and boots. We know that burn injuries of firefighters, for the most part, are most severe in hands. Sometimes that's as a result of taking gloves off. Sometimes it's not. But having that integrity for that moisture barrier within the gloves and boots is really important because they do see a lot of work. Travis did a great job of mentioning, we're cutting up our gloves, cutting up our boots, going inside, doing overhaul and everything else, and we have to make sure they're functioning properly. We'll also likely see a lot of language very specific to how we handle our gear once it's contaminated, and this is really positive because if there's departments out there that are behind the times with not, cleaning their gear on scene, not packaging dirty gear on scene, and handling their dirty gear appropriately, this should hopefully, be a bit of a kick in the butt that way. Identifies the gear is not going to be allowed in living quarters. That will be stipulated within the standard. We're going to see that, soil and contaminated gear will not be allowed to be transported in apparatus cabs. If it's transported in exterior compartments, then it has to be in a vapor-proof bag or container that, can't be punctured. This is really positive language. It's things that are being done right now by progressive departments, that are trying to reduce those unnecessary exposures post-fire. So seeing that incorporated in the standards, a real plus. There's also a good push, from the majority of those within the committee to make sure that we're choosing the right tool for the job. Certain people within the committee think that turnout gear needs to be an all-hazard type of, response ensemble. You're wearing it for everything: medicals, car accidents, high-angle rescues. Maybe departments are doing water rescue in them. I don't know. But we have to keep in mind this is for structural firefighting. It's being designed for that. That's where it should remain. And if we're doing wildland firefighting, we need a garment specific to wildland firefighting. If we're doing spec ops responses, we need to have garments selected specifically for those. I mean, we do it for hazmat already, for medicals for the most part. And we saw a real shift during COVID, where our whole medical response when it came to PPE changed, and that is a good Kickstarter to see this. So, right tool for the job. Firefighting gear should be for firefighting. We're also going to see the ability for other types of cleaning processes to likely be used if validated. So this could be ultrasonic cleaning for hard objects like your helmets or components of your SCBA. It could be liquid carbon dioxide cleaning. There's some data out there, and this isn't ours, and I haven't verified or validated, but claiming that a lot of the semi-volatile organic compounds can be more efficaciously laundered through liquid carbon dioxide cleaning. It's done at room temperature, so there can also be an argument that it may, add to the durability or the longevity of gear potentially. It's pretty expensive. It may not be something that, most departments could afford incorporating in-house, but it may be something that, through a certified ISP could be provided in the future and approved as a process through the standard. Other things we have to kind of keep in mind, and Travis again did a great job, is when we're talking about preliminary exposure reduction, like we're talking about laundering our gear, this is just showing that it's been washed. It's not clean. When people talk about, I got my gear cleaned, it's, I cleaned it after a fire. It's not cleaned. It still has a lot of stuff in it. Amanda also mentioned, the certain chemicals that we're testing for can maybe only be laundered out, 10 to 20%, like pyrene, post-fire. So we have to, use the language that our gear's laundered. It's not clean. There's a lot of good reason why we don't handle our gear a certain way once it's been in fires. And an example of that, I mean, this is gear that has PFAS, durable water repellent finishes. These are oils that were embedded into the gear. You know how it is if you're doing a roof vent, you rest your saw on your hip, you're pushing that oil, that bar oil right into that textile. It's a woven textile. So when we're considering some of the tests that are being done, we have to, again, understand, are these real world applications? A dripping of a fluid, is that something that we're going to see often? Once we wash our gear 20 times, are we going to have similar results? Is it applicable? There's value to all tests, but we have to identify whether that value should really be influencing decisions or not. Dr. Brian Orman does a pile of work at North Carolina State University on this. He's probably the authority on these tests, I would imagine. But yeah, under certain circumstances, you kneel in a puddle of most things, it's going to get in your gear, no matter what type of finish or coating there is on it. And I'll skip through that because it didn't come up well, but that was a laundering slide just showing after 25 launderings, PFAS-free and PFAS-containing DWRs have similar type of repellency, absorbency, and penetration capabilities. When it comes to PFAS-free DWRs on the outer shells of your gear right now, there does seem to be, for the outer shells, a certain reduction in the ability to launder out certain semi-volatile organic compounds. When it comes to the heavy metals, we actually see the opposite. We see that, and this is all, again, preliminary type of information, but that a lot of the metals can be more easily laundered out of gear that has DWRs on the outer shell that are PFAS free. Now, when it comes to the moisture barriers, it's a bit of a wash. Some of these contaminants are better laundered, out of moisture barriers that may have Teflon or may have PFAS, and others may not. It's kind of difficult, but all things to say, from a laundering standpoint, I don't believe there's any hazard or increased risk from these transitions that are eliminating the carcinogens that we're recommending out of the gear through this process. And bringing it back to emerging type of contaminants, lithium-ion battery fires are things that we're obviously very concerned about. They're increasing in numbers, and we want to know what are the hazards, how it's applicable to our gear. And Jeff Hughes out of Orange County really spearheaded a pile of great research there, where they were getting their gear tested after responding to lithium battery fires. And from the preliminary results that came back through Jeff, it shows that from an oxide standpoint and some of these acids, the current NFPA process is pretty good. at laundering those contaminants out of gear. So back to some of the changes. As Amanda mentioned, we're moving from 50% removal requirements to 70% removal requirements for laundering. And the only way that's going to be able to happen is through an increase in laundering temperatures, wash temperatures. It's something that was discussed by the committee through a previous revision cycle, but there was concerns about how it would affect the integrity of the gear long term. But thankfully, through consensus and further information, a shift to a higher laundering temperature will likely be the catalyst to being able to remove increased amounts of those contaminants. There's also going to be, you'll have to get your water tested. If you're doing the in-house cleaning, I believe it's every 2 years to make sure that, the hardness isn't going to impact the ability to launder. Skip that one. So some of those chemicals that need to be laundered out cover a range of pHs, phenols, as well as phthalates. The metals, antimony, arsenic, cadmium, chromium, cobalt, lead, those are typical for the panel that our members would receive if they're going to have a metals test, and of course the biologicals. So to give you an idea of how that laundering efficacy shifts when you move to just a 15-degree increase in laundering temperature, you can see the contrasting difference between those selected chemicals that will be, or contaminants that will be tested for at 105 degrees versus 120. So it's almost a doubling of the removal. And there's going to be no change of the temperature for specialized laundering. Specialized laundering will remain at 140 degrees. So hardness water testing, it's going to be 60 parts per million will be the maximum for calcium and magnesium. If there's anybody that deals with mobile laundering facilities, people coming on scene to assist with that, the source water will have to be tested, and there'll be a requirement to make sure that people follow their state, municipal, and federal legislation guidelines for wastewater effluent as well. So that may vary across the nation. Now, one of the biggest changes for 1850 will be this PPE technician, and this is really, I think, going to be an advancement. I mean, these are complicated standards. It's tough for me to get my head around some of the things, and we know the cost of gear. We know how hard it is to fight city management to try to get updated PPE because of that cost, and because of that, we really have to make sure we try to get things right as best we can. And having a PPE technician makes sense. It's going to be it's going to be incorporated. My hope is that it's going to be incorporated within the new standard as it's written. And it's no different than having an EV technician, having safety officers, driver operators, training officers trained to a certain standard. Our lives depend on our PPE. There's a high cost to it intrinsically and monetarily. And, it makes sense to have somebody dedicated to that. So this could be one person within a department, or this job could be shared among more than one person within a department or fire service. There'll have to be a job description written by management, but they're going to have a lot of authority and oversight, which is really key. The way that it's written within the current proposed document is that they're going to be responsible to be that point of contact for vendors, be that point of contact for ISPs, be responsible for the management of systems, whether those systems are done in-house or not, and taking care of all the documentation, cleaning, repairs, training members within their department on how to handle and inspect their gear. All the data collection is going to be the responsibility of the person or persons. Perfect. Inspection, they'll be responsible for inspection, routine, advanced inspection, determining the levels of training required by fire service members. Also training their own PPE technicians if there's more than one of them. Other duties include composing SOPs, procedures, preliminary exposure reduction procedures, when PPE is removed from service, how spare gear, second sets of gear, loaner gear is being handled, what to do when contamination occurs. All that's going to be the responsibility of the PPE technician, or something that will have to be delegated by the PPE technician. Storage will be another big ticket item. May require some logistical changes within some departments, and also when it comes to the repairs, some can be done in-house. Advanced repairs may be jobbed out, and the recording of these repairs, as well as the cost-benefit analysis for doing repairs on older gear, will be the responsibility of a PPE technician as part of their duties. as well as when to retire gear. I mean, it's important to know not just a date, but what sort of contaminants would necessitate replacement of gear, and that should be, you know, spec'd out within a standard operating procedure or general order. So access and authority will be, you know, vital. The PPE technician will also be responsible for having the SOPs and the systems in place for the care and custody of PPE. If there is a serious injury or firefighter fatality, that'll be part of their responsibility. And they'll be required to be consulted, record all actions, and do the health hazard assessment for their department. And that's what I was speaking about earlier with respect to these boot failures that occurred in Newark. You know, if it's within your operational model to respond to these types of fires, these are things that will have to be considered by the PPE technician. You know, are we going to be putting ourselves, in certain circumstances, exposing ourselves to those hazards? We need to incorporate stuff within tenders that require a Goodyear or storm welt on our boot to make sure those things don't happen. That has to be occurring within the health hazard assessment, being done minimally every 2 years as per the standard, as the standard is written, or as new components, become available. As new products hit the market that might have to be considered for inclusion in firefighter PPE, a new hazard assessment has to be done. So there's a lot riding on a PPE technician, but it's important because otherwise, we're all kind of, swimming in the dark a little bit, when we're trying to figure out how we match what's out there in the market to what our members' needs are. So that's really, I think, going to be the biggest change that comes out of 1850. I hope it stays in there through the next publication. We'll see. We'll see after June how fast it will happen. But to wrap it up, it's important to understand how this consolidation process will affect the standard in the future. What does that mean for us? What we can purchase, what we can't purchase. It's important to know that maybe getting the groundwork laid out early for this potential PPE technician will be important, from a fire department standpoint. We have to increase firefighter involvement in these standards. Really, I mean, we're responsible for putting this stuff on our back for 24, 48 hours at a time for 20 years that we're working. But there's very few people within the fire service that contribute to, what standards dictate what it is we put on our backs. So it's kind of a call to action for people to assist with that. And I mean, I'll finish my presentation with another quote. Sir Brian Appleton made this quote. The Piper Alpha tragedy, this was an offshore oil rig back in 1988 that exploded. It killed 165 people, and there was a big inquest in the UK. But it really, again, points out that safety is the sum of contributions that are made over a process. And again, I really hope that, others and as many people as we can possibly muster can add their voice again to the chorus of safety, so that, their contributions will hopefully save a life of somebody today or tomorrow or 20 years from now. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Neil. And here I pump up his technical expertise, and he can't work remote. But I apologize if I made an insensitive comment earlier, too. I was trying to make a comparison. But listen, we're ahead of schedule, so we're going to take a break. We've got till 11 o'clock. We have a panel discussion coming up. I know we had a lot of information on PPE thrown at the group. But I'd like this panel discussion to be more than just me asking them questions. So if you could spend the next 25 minutes and each come up with a question for the panel, that would be outstanding, because we want this to be interactive. And I'm sure you have some questions on how the standards relate to the PPE, what's going on with the standard, what are some of the changes that we see with the PPE coming. I will tell you going into this that the IFF has a program right now. We have a grant project where we're reevaluating the design of our firefighters' PPE. We kind of hit it, everyone's been busy in these standard development processes right now, but it is moving forward. So we see a vision for the next generation. So maybe, that can be one of the questions that you bring back to the table. So we'll take a break and we'll come back at 11. Thank you. We are live. Welcome back from that commercial break. Thank you for everyone for sticking with us. We wrapped up PPE. As we mentioned, there was a lot there in a very short period of time to uncover our PPE, but we want to have the opportunity for you in the audience. This is an opportunity we want to hear from you, what your questions are for the panel. And we've added a couple of representatives to the panel. So to my far left, Dave Burnswig from Columbus. He's also the Health and Safety Director for the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters. Dave, you want to introduce yourself? There's a microphone there.
Yeah. Is that on? Yep, Dave Burnswig from Columbus, Ohio. I'm a battalion chief there. And like Sean said, also the Director of Health and Safety for our state association. In addition, I sit on 4 NFPA technical committees that oversee roughly about 35 different documents, or not documents, but standards. So.
And I'm going to be coming back to that. We have Travis Tamarins. We're going to have one microphone up here, so I want to give it to Laura so she can introduce herself. Amanda Newsom's back with us. And then, of course, we have Laura Leigh Bransford. Laura, want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Laura Lee. I'm from the local 4576 in New Hanover County, North Carolina. I'm the local secretary there, as well as I do a lot of their social media. I also do some stuff for the PFF PNC with some of their communications and social media as well. And in my department, I'm heavily involved with our performance wellness team, and I'm a firefighter driver there. So.
Great. Since you have the microphone, I'm going to come right to you. And of
Okay.
course, my colleague Neil McMillan is up here. A lot of when we talk about PPE, Laura, you know, we do know that the majority of firefighters are male. I think we've seen in recent years the raising of awareness of the challenges sometimes for the females in the fire service as it relates to PPE. Can you talk a little bit about some of those challenges that female firefighters encounter when it comes to getting properly fitted gear and why that's important that we take that into consideration?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to say, just as a union leader, that we need to, of course, advocate for our brothers and sisters. And, you know, a part of that is thinking about, like, why we're up here today talking about PPE. And, you know, just the fire service has been, you know, male-dominated industry, and all the sizing is based off of male body composition. And so the bottom line is there's not a lot of research until just recently. There's studies going on for the fit of female PPE, and ultimately, you know, what's happening is it's a safety issue for females, and efficiency, and if your gear is oversized, you are having trouble working. You can get an injury. There can be fatalities. There can be air pockets inside your gear, so you know you could get burned. So things like that. So really, it's about educating our membership and our departments, and looking at the new research that's out there. There's Dr. Meredith McCreary at Florida State, as well as Professor Kwan at NC State University, that are running all these research and tests on for females, and they're compiling data of body scans of females, and then their second phase is getting ready to start, where they're going to start developing prototypes for female turnout gear. And actually, just this week, I'm lucky enough that I live in North Carolina, that I got in touch with Professor Kwan, and myself and 4 other females from my department are going to get scanned, and hopefully whatever prototypes and things like that can participate in that research. So I'm excited about that. And one more thing is that there are companies out there that do have female gear, but there's, again, not enough research to back it as far as like sizing goes. And so this study that's coming out, this research that's coming out, should help. So
I would think with the approach that many departments have when they order their gear, they have a backlog because of the manufacturing of that gear. And we're sizing our firefighters now for that gear, that it's not a big lift for the industry to start to provide gear that's properly designed for the wearer. And that our female firefighters, our sisters out there, really need to be just as protected and the attention just as focused on them so that they can operate efficiently, effectively, and safely on the emergency scene. So it's great to see that work. I know Brittany Hollerbeck, Sarah Jenke, a lot of them are involved in that. And I'm glad you're involved. Thank you. I'm going to hop this over to Dave, because Dave, I know you're going to talk a little bit about the NFPA standards coming up, but as Neil was hitting on all the standards that are in process right now, you sit on the correlating committee. And if you can talk about how hard it was or how long it took for us to get into a position such as the IFF, to have two representatives, you and Rick Swan, on that correlating committee. Talk to us a little bit about the importance of that and what the correlating committee does.
Okay, so even more generally, I would say, I mean, the correlating committee, I'll start with that, is kind of a next level over the technical committee. The technical committee are the members from industry, from the fire service, and other places, and from government that are helping to put the standard together. And then the correlating committee is actually looking at multiple standards. So there's a correlating committee that oversees the PPE projects, and there's probably about 18, 20 standards under the correlating committee. And what they're looking at is how do these all fit together, right? So that we have standards that actually kind of work well. The IFF has really put a lot of effort into having fire service members representing on not only the correlating committee, but in all the technical committees, and having a voice for the fire service. So it's very important. I mean, I'll talk about it after lunch, but really our voice does matter. The industry does want to hear it, and in most cases, our voices, we're pretty good at getting things the way we want. The exception right now that we've been dealing with for since the last edition has to do with PFAS, and really it's a complicated issue, and how to solve that problem. I believe we're going to prevail on that, and we're going to start to remove some of these hazardous substances in gear, or at least make the fire service aware of them and give them options so that they can make better decisions about what they're getting exposed to.
And I want to make sure I check to see if we have any questions from the audience. Yes. Tom, the only reason I want to wait for, I have confidence in your voice, but we have folks online. And I was going to get a younger microphone tender so he could get there quicker, because we are limited time. But
I get paid by the step, Sean.
is that the shuffle?
This is for Laura Lee. You mentioned in your department you had 4 of your coworkers getting sized. My department has 5, which is about 20% of our department. 5 were females, all of them different height and body frame. Is there some way they can sign up to help out with this, or they can get more information so maybe they can get involved?
Yeah, so I just went online and I looked up, Dr. Meredith McCreary's studies, and then I also found Professor Kwan through that way, and lucky for me, because I said I do live in North Carolina, so it's not very far of a drive for me to participate in those studies, but it's definitely worth looking into, and I can talk to you afterwards as well. So.
They're challenging it, Tom, by making you go back and forth to the rooms. Chief Healy.
Just for the whole crowd up there, Amanda said something, and I think Neil kind of clarified it, but the controversy of temperature washing, and it seems like it's probably going to be about the the ultimate lifespan of the garment. But just something I wanted to throw out and see if anyone had any ideas, and then maybe a challenge to the people in the audience. Well, if we're going to see that we really need to launder our gears to keep our people safe, I think it's going to be incumbent on the leaders in the fire service to make sure that their budget process is mindful of that. And, you know, we're not going to get 10 years out of gear. We're going to get 5 years or 4 years or whatever that number is, because buying new gear, short term might be a little bit costly, but long term, if we're not losing our members to cancer and the related costs with their treatment and covering them and their families long term, I think it's going to be a win. At something else that UL had done years ago, I have to give credit to my wife for this. She's got me, and you know, Sean, I'm a little bit of a mess myself, but we have 4 children, and she keeps our clothing impeccable, and she does that by pre-soaking everything. So is that something that we've ever looked at? That, you know, I'm sure this gear gets taken, it gets brought to a facility, it sits in the bag for a day or two before somebody gets out and ultimately stuffs it in a machine. Would it be more efficient during that period in time to have it in a bath with soap and water and just having it soak? Would that do anything for starting to release some of these carcinogens and then, you know, ultimately, hopefully keep our people safer? So I know I made some statements, but I think I also threw a question or two out, and if anyone had any ideas on that.
We'll start with Neil and then come over to Amanda.
Yeah, great questions, Chief Healy. I mean, and FD&Y knows, you know, better than, you know, most departments about when to get rid of gear. I mean, Hurricane Sandy, Deutsche Bank fire, you guys were throwing out hundreds of sets of gear that were exposed to a level that you knew you wouldn't be able to properly remediate that. And you used different types of funding mechanisms to help replace that gear, whether it was grants or other type of funding assistance, which is sometimes out of the reach of a lot of departments. But again, within the committees, there's discussions from some fire service representatives wanting to eliminate the 10-year lifespan of gear from the standard. And I mean, I'm of the opinion that the price of doing business when you have gear that's, you know, met its lifespan, whether through use, washing, or contamination, get rid of it, because I mean, the other costs from, again, the illnesses or the injuries that can happen from having gear that, you know, doesn't have the protection it should have, you know, far outweighs the cost of a new set of gear. So I think you bring up a really good point. I think that the success of, you know, the whole care, maintenance, and selection standard within NFPA speaks to that. We are washing our gear more. We are laundering it, you know, just from sweat, from other contamination, dirt and grime that we know will degrade the fibers within the weave and the textiles. I think that's a real good positive sign. If it leads to, you know, durability issues, again, price of doing business to protect our members. That's my opinion.
Thanks. As we go over to Amanda, if most of you aren't aware, OSHA has put forth a proposal to expand the fire brigade regulation. And that proposed expansion would now cover 29 states that are OSHA or OSHA recognized states. And in the proposal and the regulation, they're waiving the 10-year replacement. But this is even more important, how the standards, because what OSHA is doing is they're referencing many of the NFPA standards, and they're referencing the NFPA standards applicable to our PPE. So as we go through these discussions, if you think, well, you know, OSHA doesn't apply to me, well, 29 states would potentially be now OSHA compliant that would cover all firefighters. That's going to expand to all 51 territories and states. That they're not requiring you to replace the gear after 10 years. It's open for public comment now. We'll have more on that from the IFF. There are letters that are going out as we speak. The General President Kelly has sent a letter out on that. If we get time later, I'll get into it. Amanda, sorry, didn't mean to hijack there.
No, that's okay, because I actually didn't know that, and that's something I'm going to go back and look at, because yeah, that is disappointing, to say the least. But to your question about pre-soaking, we do have some initial data at UL. We've taken all the data that we've collected from the 1851 program over the last 4 years when the standard came out, and compiled it, which is what I showed on the bar graph on my slide as a summarized number. But within that, there's a lot of other data points that go with it, and actually pre-soaking is actually an excellent way of eliminating some of that, those contaminants from your gear before doing your washing. So yeah, I would much rather see that gear sitting in a bin full of water with soap than sitting in a bag for 2 days. Absolutely.
Anybody else want to comment on that? And please don't encourage him. Yeah.
Great idea.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes, Brian. Tom will come with he's getting his cardiac workout.
Thanks, Tom. I just wanted to say that one of the things, so my local in Cambridge, Local 30, they sort of have a fund that we've established with the city. And what that does is it allows us to replace sort of the consumables of the PPE, right? The hoods, the gloves, the boots, that kind of stuff that the city's not responsible to replace. So those kinds of things that get either destroyed or damaged during it, instead of cleaning them, we replace them. So we sort of keep a store in-house, and we obviously 2 sets of gear. But because of what the local has been able to do with the city to sort of jointly fund this fund, if somebody needs a new pair of boots, we don't have to wait to order a pair. We have them. And so I think that's kind of sped up the process of making sure our guys are in the right gear at the right time. The actual bunker pants and the coats and stuff, obviously that's a bigger discussion. It's a much more expensive thing to replace. But I just want to point out that at the local level, there are things that we're doing to sort of move in that direction.
No, thank you. In Cleveland, we had the quartermaster where we had, a cache of equipment. And at one point, we had just ordered the bunker gear the same way. You just had standard sizes. But then we transitioned to the gear that was measured for the individual. So in some ways, the gear doesn't sit on the shelf for 10 years anymore, but it's still a challenge to replace gear in a timely fashion if it's damaged. Yes, David, go right ahead.
Yeah, so, I'm a big advocate of the retirement, and we're dealing with this in the respiratory standard as well with SCBA and trying to get a reasonable retirement period on there. But there's several reasons why this is so critical, right? So one is, the big one is there's product obsolescence, right? We are developing, the standard gets changed every 5 years, and it's changed because, like every other standard, right, they're written in blood. Right, there's things we're doing, things we're adding, new technologies that we want to add and we're requiring to protect our members. And so if you're wearing something that's 15 years old, you may be wearing some technology that won't protect you in the modern fire environment. The other thing is we also have an accumulation of contaminants in your gear that we're just not getting out that are going to happen over time. We have breakdown of fibers, things that are hard to evaluate without destructive testing. And then the other thing is, look at what's happening with PFAS now, right? We're trying to phase out PFAS, trying to get it off of the gear, and you have protective finishes, and in some cases, there's very high levels of PFAS in some of the protective finishes that are, probably about 8 years old right now in service in the fire service. And if you don't have a way to phase them out, they're not going away. Right, so that's why the standards changed to address these really critical issues, right? Who keeps their iPhone for 10 years? Who keeps, a lot of things for 10 years? The technology evolves and we need to evolve with it.
No, Dave, that's a good point. And I'm going to ask Neil to address it, but within the NFPA process, and Dave will talk about, there are NIPMAMs, a notice of intent to make a motion. And one of those is to send it back to committee, is to send the standard back to committee, which could delay the implementation of some of the victories that we've realized in this cycle another 1.5 years, 2 years. So we're potentially delaying those benefits by sending it back to committee. Neil, Dave mentioned PFAS, so let's throw it out there. The question's been asked. Is there an alternative? What are we seeing coming into the marketplace? Are the manufacturers looking for an alternative? Or are they fighting us every step of the way and they're going to go kicking with that? What are you seeing from the research and science and research position?
Yeah, great topic, great comments and questions. We're dealing with an NFPA standard right now from 2018. And the UV light test, which is current in that standard, dates back to 2006. Just late last year, the first moisture barrier came to market that was PFAS free. It was an alternative that can be chosen and selected and pass testing. So that was 18 years in the making, and that only really occurred, and I think I can speak pretty frankly about that because of the pressure from the IFF, the pressure from General President Ed Kelly, the real impetus from the end users, firefighters saying we're not interested in having this carcinogen within our turnout gear, and because of that, industry made that shift. They invested, they got testing done. We would like to see more suppliers do the same thing, and processes are underway for that. But it's vital, and to the comments about the changing the standards, the NITMAM, this notice of an intent for motion to make a motion. That's something that's been put forward by 3M. This is all public comments. 3M is looking to send everything back to committee, and that could delay the NFPA 1970 from being published by potentially another 24 months. So, that's another 24 months dealing with a 2018 standard. Everybody that's doing all the hard work on that committee are also the ones doing the hard work in the committee for 1850, the laundering, care, and maintenance. So decisions have been made to delay that standard until we finalize 1970. So if 1970 gets delayed 2 years, that's a delay for the care and maintenance. That's 2 years further for potentially having a PPE technician, making some of the great, recommendations that, love hearing, what's happening in Cambridge. That's great. But it delays and it delays and delays. And until there's a requirement either through OSHA, because you lose over half your market potentially as a supplier or manufacturer, until people are pushed to make those decisions, those safer alternatives don't come. So we are happy that suppliers and manufacturers are now making the move, making the push. Potentially by year end, there'll be other moisture barriers come to market that can meet the current standard, that will give other options to be evaluated by departments. Those are things we're happy to see. We know that the PFAS-free DWRs that have been applied to the outer shells of our gear have been in the market for 3 years, and we haven't seen any evidence of increased injuries, burns, hazards, any of those things happening to firefighters across the nation in those 3 years from the use and incorporation of the PFAS-free alternatives in the outer shells at least. So we would like to see this new standard be published as soon as possible, kind of eliminate the hurdles, challenges, and delays, get moving on it, because all the stuff I was speaking about, Amanda was speaking about, Dave will be speaking about, really is going to be a better standard to have safer firefighting for our members in the future.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a comment about from sort of a affiliate leadership position and just being an advocate. So North Carolina is a right to work state. We don't have collective bargaining. We don't have, some of the other benefits that other states do. And it's just really important with everything that's going on with PPE that we, especially for us in North Carolina and my local and with New Hanover County, is just educating and forming good relationships with whether it's your county commissioners or city leaders and your admin, and just really educating them, because let's face it, it's cost, but again, I agree. I mean, sometimes doing the right thing is spending some money. And last year, our local, we worked together with our department to find a solution for alternative gear, so to limit our time in our turnout gear. So we were able to get funding for multi-purpose gear. So we're not always in our turnout gear. So if we're in our workout clothes, we can throw on this multi-purpose gear and go to a medical call or extrication or whatever it is. And we did all that by really educating our chiefs and our county commissioners and forming those relationships, and we were able to get that funding, and that's really important. And we're not a huge fire department, and we were able to do that, and I just wanted to say how important that was.
No, I think that's a critical point. about education and us being involved in the research and us financing research. The IFF, the members do pay into a cancer research fund. We do have money through our science and research team to investigate alternative methods of coming to the market. Because I found that not just in the PPE, but when we were talking about protecting residential lightweight construction, when we were dealing with the home builders, when we took them evidence that demonstrated that those floors failed so early based on the work at UL and ULFSRI, it was the home builders that started really pushing the market to change the codes to require the protection. So if we can bring that evidence-based information forward, we see departments or jurisdictions more than willing to, I shouldn't say more than willing, but willing to take that step and invest that money to the health and safety of their members. Travis, we were talking about contamination, decontamination. You put up some numbers on the effectiveness of decontamination. Can you talk a little bit about different methods departments are using, and are you seeing departments out there that are successfully implementing mass decon in the field?
Yeah, so the main thing that we're seeing is that preliminary exposure reduction, where a small diameter hand line, maybe a reducer with a garden hose attachment to it. That seems to be the trend from what I'm hearing from everybody. A bucket, soft bristle brush, some soap, and I mean, it's not perfect right now. I think there's still a transition period in the fire service, but we're getting better with it. And myself included in that, it's very difficult sometimes to remember that needs to be set up or needs to be done. But it goes back to kind of what I was saying in my entire presentation, that we got to have each other's backs, and a non-harmful reminder of, hey, get over to decon. It goes back to rehab and everything else that we kind of break each other about when we come out. But those are the big methods that I'm seeing right now. The laundering when we get back, the showering, all of those seem to be becoming the norm of what we're doing. There's other methods out there that, again, it goes back to budgets and what you can make work. But again, something's better than nothing, and I think where we're at right now is 100% better than we were last year and 100% better than we were the year before that. So we're building on it. It's just a matter of time of changing the culture, all throughout. So.
Yeah. So I think we also have to kind of take a little bit higher view also. So I'm a huge supporter of all the contamination control things that we're trying to do. But let's remember that a lot of those are on the reactive side, right? They're mitigating an exposure that happened. So there's a prevention side with PPE that we should be looking at, and I think a lot of departments aren't because it's not required in the standard. And that is, and that is really the optional requirement in the standard for liquid and particulate protection, or protection from liquids and particulates, right? So there is some gear on the market that has additional features, interface controls, has like a snow skirt, ways to prevent all that stuff from getting onto your body, so you're actually reducing your exposure from the beginning. So when we think about turnout gear, right? Historically, turnout gear had things we were originally probably trying to protect ourselves from water, and then from thermal, and then breathability, and we hadn't really been thinking about until recently contaminant exposure. And that is the next generation of turnout gears we should be looking at, and we should be speccing the optional requirement. And personally, I feel we should be making that a requirement in the standard to have those requirements so that we're reducing the amount of exposure that's happening to us. Now, the trade-off, right, the cost of that is that when you add those levels of protection, right, you do get trade-offs, right? You do have less breathability of your gear, right? So that all that moving around and everything you did, and if you remember the mass test that the IFF ran, you see all that, the blue light showing how that stuff got onto your body and why we're smelling it for a few days after a fire. So in order to prevent that or reduce it significantly, you got to put these controls on. So there's going to be a little more heat accumulation, right? But you have to change, you have to educate your members, like we mentioned. You have to change how you do, or after decon that you're doing rehab more quickly, rotating crews. So there's things we can do that reduce our exposures, and those are some things that we should be thinking about when we're looking at gear, and looking at, again, the trade-offs. Because every decision you make with your turnout gear, your THL, your TPP, right, those are all, you're all going to be making trade-offs that you have to. But what do we want to protect ourselves from? That's the question you should be asking, and thinking about the big picture and what's the current technology able to do.
See if there's any questions from the audience. You know, Dave, you kind of opened up, I don't want to call it Pandora's box, but it's one of the things that we've discussed, and I'm going to put this to the committee, to the panel, but one of the things that we discussed, it seems like changes have happened to our standards incrementally. Like you mentioned, it's been written in blood a couple times up here. We've seen an incident, we've seen some research that has identified a hazard that maybe we need to modify our gear to meet. But then, really, have we taken a step back and looked at holistically what our members are being exposed to hazard-wise, and what, in totality, that hazard environment is, and what we should be protecting our members against? And so I know with the gear testing, it's done componently. We're seeing, you know, the gear is made from different manufacturers a lot of times. People are contributing, but we have seen a manufacturer coming to market potentially that has a full ensemble that they claim is PFAS free. So, you know, we're trying to do our due diligence. So I guess instead of rambling on here, I kind of want to put it to the committee. What are your thoughts about the approach the standard has taken to developing the PPE? Do we need to look at it from a holistic perspective? And then I was going to add on the importance of looking at the various jobs and roles that the fire service provides, and should we have gear that meets that specific role so our members are not always in the same turnout gear? I know it's a huge, wide open question, but
I'll start. That's a lot. And maybe an unpopular opinion, but I think we continue to develop these standards for the what ifs. What's the worst case scenario? We're not looking at what we're doing day to day. We're not looking at those responses that we're going on. You know, we're not encompassing heat, weather, you know, where we're wearing this gear at. Are we wearing it in Florida? Are we wearing it in Alaska? Are we wearing it in, you know, California or you know, Michigan? And we're trying to protect ourselves from the worst case scenario all the time. And, you know, maybe some of that does need to get dialed back and look at what our actual, I guess, needs are, you know, across the country. That'd be my take to kind of.
Go for it, and I'll jump in there.
Make a decision. I love that segue because actually Neil has talked about it several times about the PPE technician role that's being added to 1850. And I think that is going to be an amazing solution for what you just said, because if we have somebody who is responsible for and educated to make these decisions, I've heard so many times that the PPE people are typically like light duty people. They're not people that are in the job very long. They're not very knowledgeable of what they're selecting, whereas this PPE technician role would be an educated, you know, qualification that would be required for that person making these decisions. If we have an educated and qualified person making those decisions, we can rely on a risk assessment more so than we can now. Right now, we plan for the worst case scenario, like you're saying, but if we have somebody who can go in and make those decisions with the knowledge and information that they need, then you can rely a little bit more on a risk assessment. Like, no, this person doesn't need to go in this gear to this event. Maybe we need this type of gear. So I totally and 100% agree. And actually, I will say, internationally and especially Europe, that's exactly how they operate. They operate more of on a risk assessment basis than we do here in the U.S.
So yeah, some great comments. I guess there's two things. One is, to Travis's point, is that, right, the worst case scenario, right, a structural fire or a firefighter getting trapped in a structure fire in a high heat condition or a thermal event, we would definitely, we all agree, I think, that we want to protect our firefighters from that. But that's not that's not what we do most of the time. And so more progressive departments out there are starting to recognize that turnout gear, structural firefighting turnout gear, is for structure fires, and that they needed something different for responses, for other responses, that you have response wear that is for EMS calls, you have response wear for highway incidents, for extrications, technical rescue, and that you have a different ensemble that doesn't have the same level of protection. And that makes a lot of sense, right? You wouldn't wear a level A hazmat suit if you had if you were an ARF firefighter, and for the most part, the Air Force, when on their bases, right, their firefighters have both ARF gear and they have structural gear. And so those are the kinds of things we should be thinking about, is that this isn't all hazards gear, right? This is very high-tech stuff. It's amazing stuff, and it does a lot of things, but it doesn't have to be worn for everything. And that will help reduce our exposures, right? If we're not wearing the gear that has all the exposures, that has all these other qualities, and we're wearing the right outfit, right, for the job.
I just wanted to add something and circle back to sort of the female firefighter turnout gear and talking about testing and exposures. For that, currently, to my knowledge, there is no mannequin, a female form mannequin right now. I think they're going to try to develop one with this, with the prototypes of the turnout gear coming out soon. And so, that leaves, females a little vulnerable in the turnout gear with testing and how accurate is it. And so once they get these mannequins for flash fire and testing and things like that, hopefully that research will help the female firefighters as well. I just want to make that comment.
I think Travis kind of hit the nail on the head as far as if we want to engineer all what-if scenarios, and those risks, associated risks, out of our turnout gear, we're going to be spending $30,000 on a set of turnout gear, and that's not realistic. And the way that the standard's been built, it's quite a bit easier to include a new test or to switch out a test within the standard than just to remove one. One of the liquids that their gear has to be measured against is a phosphate ester-based hydraulic fluid. That hydraulic fluid went out of fashion, in common use, decades ago. It's hazardous. There's certain requirements to handle it appropriately. It's used in certain aviation applications, but it's not what anybody would consider to be a common fireground hazard if it's only found in a few fighter jets and some commercial jets. So it's difficult to remove that, and we're looking to exchange that hydraulic fluid with a more commonly used one, mineral-based hydraulic fluid, but it's taking years, potentially, to have that instituted. So the process itself is a bit cumbersome, which leads to increased costs. And as I mentioned in my presentation, in Europe, and of course firefighting is different, locally, regionally, different jurisdictions, they can get sets for $700. Maybe there's certain gear we can beat up, wash every time we use it after shift, and throw it out every December. And maybe our municipalities and cities would have more of an appetite to exchange a product that's $1,000 or $1,200, as opposed to a set of turnout gear that's $5,000, where every excuse is being made to keep damaged, contaminated gear still in use 10 years down the road. Now, I don't know if that's the answer, but those are the discussions we should be having, and we should be modeling the NFPA standards process, as volunteers within that process, to make sure it's as flexible as possible to allow for it.
So during this discussion, one of the things that kind of pops in my head when we talk about hazard assessment, understanding the hazards, understanding the gear, what is the role of education and training in this as it applies to gear? I look at some of these worst case scenarios where we're trying to protect our firefighters, and just from my personal perspective and my experience in my career, if I look back on a couple of cases where maybe you classify them as close calls, if you take the research from FSRI, I look back retrospectively and go, why was I there? So, when I start looking at the information, the education that comes from the research at FSRI, are we doing a good enough job to educate our firefighters on the limitations of the gear or the understanding of their fire environment, and also the importance of decontamination? And so how does education and how do we get that information out to our members? And I think that for the whole panel. Another big question. Dave, I've never seen you shy before.
I know, I want to give other people a chance to.
And
I'll
I
s-
feel,
oh, go
I always
ahead.
have something.
oh, no, go ahead.
Okay. Well, again, as you know, on your executive boards or maybe during membership meetings, you could have these discussions. Maybe put together some committees, get other members involved, having those type of discussions as far as like education. Utilizing the resources from the IFF and that information, and then also maybe going to your training department too, and bringing that information to them, and getting it out that way as well.
I think something to kind of consider, as far as training and education, is all the great resources out there through NIOSH and NIST and the case studies of when our members have unfortunately sustained an injury or potentially a death, where their PPE contributed in part to that passing or part to the circumstances in regards to an injury. I think that kind of paves the way for allowing good discussions on the gear that we're comfortable using, we need to be trained to use, and also it's stuff that internally within NFPA we have to be considering. One thing I failed to mention with the last question in my response was we don't measure to see the benefits of any of the new changes necessarily that are made through each revision cycle. If we're instituting a new test, a new requirement, we're never checking up to see if we are actually seeing a reduction in the injuries or illnesses that we're supposed to be preventing. And I think that really has to be key in that whole process and key in the dissemination of information. Are we instituting really real-world applicable testing that has seen a reduction in firefighter injuries? Because if those injuries are not being reduced and we're not getting the benefit from that, we're just driving the cost up. We're just putting in more barriers to prevent, again, more choice and alternatives to be available for selection in the market.
So, to your question, Sean, as far as what's the role of education and what should we be doing? I mean, it's massively important. But the fact is that our rank and file, the boots on the ground, they want to be concerned about it. They are concerned about it. You can tell them about it. You can educate them about it. But it's not what they're thinking about, right? They're thinking about. They're not thinking about preliminary exposure reduction. They're not thinking about showers afterwards. They believe in it. You sit at the table, you talk to them about these things, 100%, right? But their training, their practicing is, stretching, laddering, RIT, doing the basics, being masters at it. And once you start talking about standards, right, to the boots on the ground, the people this really matters to, they're going to fall asleep pretty quickly, right? And I talk about standards a lot, and I understand that. This is 100%, this is a labor issue. This is a management issue, right? This should be and is one of our top labor issues. And at the local level, it should be one of your top issues, is protecting your members. And what do you have to do? And so what our firefighters respond well to, right? Number one, education, but number two is that we have policies that we enforce, right? We don't just put it down, we don't have a decon SOP, we actually do it. And it's not just something written from behind a desk that basically says, hey, if you don't do this, you're in trouble, but that we facilitate it. We have processes in place so that when you're clearing a fire scene, you're going to go through a demobilization process, right? These things are going to happen. And by the way, this is written in the standards, but the fact is that most folks don't know it, right? We have a rehab standard, which we think about just cooling yourself down, but the rehab standard was rewritten about 5 years ago to really include the whole process from, are you ready to take the run, to how do we get you back and rehabilitated completely, right? Contamination and rest and rehab's not just hydration and nutrition and cooling down, it's also decontaminating. And so these are things that we need to do, but they really need to be pushed, and labor needs to hold management accountable to say that this is an expectation and that you're going to, we expect management, start at the top to hold their officers responsible for making sure that their members are safe. And officers should be taking that on.
And just a quick note from my local, we actually set up a cancer prevention committee and have worked extremely well with our management to set some of these policies, not necessarily enforce them, but to work with them so that we have a comprehensive decon policy and a comprehensive turnout gear storage policy. You know, that what I talked about during my presentation of no personal belongings on your turnout gear rack. You know, we've come up with some out-of-the-box solutions, such as you know, like Rubbermaid or Tupperware containers that seal, that if you need to, you know, have your personal belongings with your turnout gear, they're sealed off, so you're not getting that that cross-contamination. So there's ways, but the local level and the labor definitely have to be involved with management, sitting down at the table, you know, and the members need to understand that it's not just a nitpicking policy out there. It's about sitting down and doing right for everybody involved.
Do you want to tackle that one? Any questions? Yes. George, Chief Ely. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. You can get there.
More of a comment from the table. And where are we going to realize change? We're going to realize it with the young people. And we have to really, you know, mold them and indoctrinate them. So our training divisions, I think, just have to have a commitment that, you know, probably we're not burning every day a recruit is in recruit school, but on the days that we do burn, this is how we proceed. We do that contamination reduction while they're on air. We get them into the mindset that they're going to be hosed down, they're going to hang their gear out, and maybe on a weekly case when we're doing this training at the academy, they're laundering their gear. We have to start building that muscle memory that when we're doing, you know, duties on the fire ground or at the academy that don't require us to be in our personal protective equipment, that we're not in it, because we're not really setting them up for success, right? Probably we all remember fondly going to the fire academy and getting this bright, shiny gear, and probably most of us took some joy in as that gear started to get a little bit less shiny, a little bit less new, and that was our goal. That was our, you know, that was our indoctrination into the fire service. It's going to be tough to change some of the old dogs. That's unfortunate, but let's start to set the bar. Let's put a line in the sand and say this is how the fire service is going to move forward.
More importantly, sometimes that's how we evaluated each other, right? By the condition of the gear, or how dirty the gear was. And is that really an important evaluation point? So thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, what I want to do is open it up to the committee, the panel here. I want to give everybody, you know, 2 minutes to give a message, to give some thoughts. Dave, do you want to start on the left? And we'll just walk down.
Yeah, I hope everybody here is, you know, is involved in their PPE process, understands the importance of it. And I'll just tell you kind of the philosophy when we're doing this, when I'm looking at it from my department and we're looking at gear, you know, some of the questions you want to make sure you pose to the folks that are involved in the process, hopefully your committee, is one, understanding the limitations of PPE, right? Don't expect your PPE to do everything it can't. We want it to do some amazing things, and I would argue that, you know, it's PPE is your turnout gear and your SCBA are some of the most high-tech stuff you have, right? They do amazing things. They're almost magical of what you're able to do in the environment. The fact that we could put somebody into an environment and in a flashover for that matter and then survive is just incredible, right? It was easier to put people in space than to be able to put them into that environment and survive with the PPE of that generation. Right? It wasn't until recently, very recently, where we had PPE that could protect us from where our face pieces weren't melting on our faces, right? And so the fact that we can do this is quite amazing. But again, there's trade-offs, right? The trade-offs of your breathability and how much heat you're going to protect yourself from, what you can do, and you need to kind of measure those things and figure out what do you want it to do. And now contamination, right? Is it worth it? I'll just tell you, my department, and we're a large metro, and we went about 4 years ago, we opted to put in our spec the optional liquid and particulate requirements, that it's third-party certified by UL, and that we have that level of protection. And yes, there are trade-offs, and folks say, oh, this gear is a little bit hotter, right? But it's worth it, right? Because we can control that heat buildup. We can control that. We can rotate crews more often. We can cool them down. What we couldn't control was what was getting into their body. And when they're wearing this gear, they come out, they're like, well, my uniform doesn't smell. It's not coming out of my pores. It's made a big difference. And so, I encourage you to really get involved in the process for your department and make sure that you're protecting yourselves, right? You have for what you want to.
Thanks. If you look in the lobby out here, and I know people online can't see it, but on 718's window out here, it says participation is the key to success. And I think that holds true for everything that we're talking about here. I'm looking at everybody out here in the crowd, and you have to be involved in this process. I didn't know much about the NFPA process, how to get involved, public comment, anything like that, but I'm learning as I'm going, much thanks to some of the people sitting up here. But it's important to be involved. We are the end users of our gear. We constantly have a complaint of people making decisions that aren't the boots on the ground, but we have the opportunity with this to be involved in that, and that's what's important. So in a nutshell, get involved. Get involved, whether you're from the state association, out to your locals. Get this message out. We have an epidemic going on with cancer in the fire service. We have all these issues that are, lithium-ion battery contamination, all this stuff involved with our PPE that we really need to look at and take seriously moving forward. So get involved, participate, hand it off.
So I think my overarching thought about PPE right now comes down to historically we've always thought about TPP, our thermal exposure, and THL, our breathability exposure. And I think what is the shift that's occurring right now is we also need to think about contaminant exposure. It's kind of the third leg that goes with that, because that does balance in your thermal and your breathability controls. And so I think instead of just looking at those two things, we have this third leg that we need to be looking at now called contaminant control. And I talked about vapor protection. I think that's key. I think it's not just through your respiratory. It's not just respiratory exposure that can cause cancer. It's absolutely your dermal exposure. And we need to have better test methods for it. We need to have better products for it. And I think we can do that, but we need to start thinking about it. It needs to be in the forefront of our mind whenever we're speccing gear. And Columbus has done that with their particulate products. And and that's the only one that's on the market right now. It's the one that he has. So that just tells me that that's not something in the minds of the purchasers today, and I absolutely think it should be moving forward.
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to what I said before, is it's important as local leaders to be advocates for our membership and educate, whether it's our admin or our government officials, but also just having that peer-to-peer support and tying it all back into health and wellness and longevity in your career. So, whether it's the female firefighter turnout gear fit and talking to your females at your departments and hearing what they have to say, because it's a safety issue. And it needs to be addressed. And there is stuff coming out, and there is some gear out there for females, and whether it's multi-purpose gear or some kind of alternative gear to be in instead of turnout gear when you're going to an extrication or a medical call and you're in your workout clothes or getting up in the middle of the night. It's just educating, advocating, and just being persistent. And it's sometimes super frustrating, but just keep at it, and hopefully you'll make some waves. So.
I don't know how to summarize it, but I mean, maybe 50 years ago, it was glass and brass on Thursdays for cleaning, spaghetti lunch on Sundays, and 50 years from now, it'll probably be the same. But when it comes to change in the fire service, like, I'm buoyed by what I've seen as far as change when it comes to preliminary exposure reduction, you know, eliminating contaminants, not having that dirty, salty gear. You know, I see it, I've seen it, that transition in, you know, some of the most aggressive fire departments in this nation. And that's really inspiring. When it comes to comments like we need to change our culture, we don't. Our culture, as we know, is about protecting each other, about making sure that, you know, the health and well-being of our brothers and sisters is first and foremost. And we've seen that enacted in some of the processes out there, and that's really encouraging. And we'll have setbacks. I mean, nothing hits harder like a TikTok with the latest Drake tune and a firefighter in turnout gear doing a workout. But it shifts back, and we see that change, and we see the education there, reminding people that maybe that's not a great idea, and we see the stair climbs without gear, we see the charitable events without gear. So I really think it's a message of hope. I think that this workshop is a real testament to the advances we're already seeing and that we've accepted, and there's work to be done, but I'm really optimistic that work's gonna happen fast.
Thank you to everybody. I mean, and research is going to be at the forefront of that, no doubt about it, and partnerships and relationships. And the only thing I want to just close by is say we have done a tremendous job of advocating for our member safety and protecting them in that thermal environment. But I think we need to do a little bit better of a job educating our members on the limitations of that gear, that doesn't make them superheroes, that they can survive anything. They still have to understand the basics of fire behavior. They still have to understand the basics of the impact of ventilation and how that changes the fire behavior and the development of flow paths. Because we still have to understand our basics to prevent our members from getting into a situation where they have to rely on the gear to get them out of it. So, but thank you to everybody. We're going to break for lunch. Before we break for lunch, I do want to recognize, I know DVP Colbert said it, but I'm giving him a hard time. But Tom Flam retires next week at the IFF. After 12 years, Tom, your dedication is incredible. Thank you for allowing me to, you know, point you out every now and then, but you've been an inspiration to many of us, so thank you. So we'll see everybody at 1 o'clock or 12:45, where we'll have Dave Burnswig dazzle you with the intricacies of the NFPA process. So we'll see you at 12:45. Thank you. Lunch is right over here.